Can you tell me the benefits of crashing out of the European Union and immediately falling under the auspices of World Trade Organization rules? Can you give me the positives?
Sure. Well, ideally, the UK would be able to strike new free trade agreements with countries like the United States that it believes it wouldn't be able to necessarily do so with the European Union. In addition to that, it would have the freedom to not be beholden to the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, and have more independence or sovereignty over its trading relations. That's
there it is, in a nutshell. Now, let's get into the detail, and this is where my ignorance becomes spectacular. The documents that were filed yesterday by the UK and the EU in Geneva, to quote you back at yourself, they outlined the terms that they will use, i.e. the UK and the EU, to trade with the rest of the world once Britain leaves the EU. Now, you explain that the two submissions are fundamentally different. Can you take it from there? And bear in mind that, unlike you, hardly anybody listening to this programme knows the first thing about the WTO. A lot of us would struggle to spell it.
Well, I'm glad people are paying attention to it. It's something I've tracked. And
better late than never, Bryce. Better exactly. Late than never. So go on, from that line, the two submissions are fundamentally different.
Sure. So broadly, the UK and the EU have essentially triggered the starting gun on a series of WTO negotiations that will determine the terms by which they trade with the rest of the world. For some background here, the UK is currently a WTO member in its own right. The issue is it does not have an independent schedule of concessions at the WTO. That's basically the menu upon which Britain trades with the rest of the world. Yeah. It needs to have that if it's going to strike trade deals. And the way that its approach is different from the EU is the UK wants to replicate its current trade WTO commitments by making just a few technical changes and then submitting it to the WTO for certification.
But our current relationship with the WTO is contingent upon being members of the European Union, so that seems a slightly optimistic approach, if I've understood you correctly.
Correct. The UK's trade terms at the WTO are enshrined in the EU's scheduled concessions.
So what we are essentially saying is we would like to carry on with all of the privileges and status of membership of a 600 million market with our reduced status as a 60 million or 500 million to 60 million. We're saying treat us exactly the same as you did when we were members of the European Union.
Ideally, yes. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right?
Yeah. What's the likelihood?
The rest of the WTO membership now have 90 days to raise their objections.
Well, but hang on, what about sovereignty? They're not allowed to object to our plan, are
they? This is just with regards to the EU's plan at the WTO. As WTO members, everyone has a right to say whether their trade commitments are being affected.
So how many members of the WTO are there, roughly?
There's 164 total, 136 outside of the EU.
So those 164 minus 136, they're all allowed to have a say on our future, so to speak.
Correct. And
so
I'm
told
that several major countries are already planning to object to the UK's approach.
For example?
Well, for example, the United States, Brazil, and New Zealand have already said they don't agree to the UK's plan. A major sticking point for them is the fact that the EU and the UK share a quota system that limits imports of sensitive goods like beef, lamb, sugar, what have you.
Yes.
The UK cannot simply replicate these quotas and has proposed to split them with the EU based on a percentage of historical trade flows.
Okay.
It's expected that at some time in the next 3 months, countries like the US, Brazil, New Zealand, and others will object to the UK plan and ask for a better deal.
So we're going to be simultaneously trying to do a deal with the European Union and simultaneously trying to do a deal with the 164 minus 136 members of the WTO.
That's exactly right. There are no sharks in Lake Geneva, but the WTO is full of them. They smell blood in the water, and they're going to demand their pound of flesh.
I knew this wasn't going to be pretty, but I didn't think it was going to be this ugly. to be honest with you, and I've read your Twitter thread this morning. So all of these countries, or any other WTO members, not just the ones that you mentioned, can object and probably will object to the Secretariat's certification of the UK's schedules. How long does this sort of stuff take, Bryce?
Well, that's a great question. This is totally unprecedented.
You mean there's not loads and loads of countries who've already done exactly what we're about to do?
That's correct. The WTO has a structure by which the UK can negotiate with any aggrieved members. Based on current timelines, they have about a year or more to try to figure out some sort of mutually agreeable solution. That's not going to be an easy process. And it's possible these talks could devolve into WTO dispute settlement proceedings.
Would you put a percentage on that possibility, or are you too professional to do things like that?
No, I will not.
Oh, go on. So this is the dispute settlement proceedings that would determine the actual legality of our plan.
That is correct, yes. Like all things WTO, it's complicated.